Kharg Island handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. It is a small, flat island in the northern Persian Gulf, roughly 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast. And right now, the President of the United States is publicly considering seizing it. On March 29th, Donald Trump told the Financial Times, and I quote, "Maybe we take Kharg Island, maybe we don't. We have a lot of options." He then added something that should concern every American. He said, "It would also mean we had to be there for a while." And what I am going to show you today, using structural history and strategic analysis, is that Kharg Island is not an opportunity. It is a trap. It is perhaps the most dangerous trap in modern military history, and America is walking straight into it. Okay, so let me explain why I say this with such confidence. Because this is not the first time a great power has tried to control a strategic island in the Persian Gulf. And every single time it has been attempted, the results have been catastrophic for the occupier. Let me walk you through the history. First, in 1622, the Portuguese Empire controlled Hormuz Island at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Portugal had held Hormuz for over a century. It was the center of their eastern trade network. They built a massive fortress. They had naval superiority. They believed they were untouchable. And then the Safavid Persians, working with the English East India Company, besieged the island. The Portuguese garrison was destroyed. Portugal lost Hormuz and never recovered its position in the Gulf. Within decades, the Portuguese Empire in Asia was finished. The lesson is this: controlling a small island near Iran works until Iran decides it does not. Second, the British Empire. Britain controlled much of the Persian Gulf for over 150 years. They established bases on islands and coastal territories throughout the region. Bahrain, Kuwait, the Trucial States. Britain believed that naval power and island bases guaranteed permanent control over Gulf oil. But maintaining those bases became increasingly expensive. Local populations resisted. And in 1971, Britain was forced to withdraw from east of Suez. The greatest empire in modern history could not sustain the cost of controlling strategic positions in the Persian Gulf. And Britain had far more experience, far more local knowledge, and far more regional allies than America has today. Third, and this is the example that should terrify every American strategist. In 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq attacked Iran. During the Iran-Iraq War, both sides targeted oil infrastructure in the Gulf. Iraq attacked Kharg Island repeatedly between 1984 and 1988. They bombed it with aircraft. They hit it with missiles. They damaged the oil terminals severely. And you know what happened? Iran kept exporting oil. They repaired the damage. They rerouted shipments. They adapted. Iraq spent enormous resources trying to destroy Kharg Island's capacity, and it never worked. Iran's oil exports continued throughout the entire 8-year war. Kharg Island has already survived sustained military attack. It has already proven that bombing it does not stop Iranian oil. Fourth, America itself. In 1988, the United States launched Operation Praying Mantis against Iranian naval forces in the Gulf. It was the largest American naval engagement since World War II. America destroyed Iranian oil platforms and sank several ships. It was a clear tactical victory, and it achieved nothing strategic. Iran did not change its behavior. Iran did not surrender. Iran did not stop threatening shipping. Within years, Iran had rebuilt everything America had destroyed. And the cost to America was not just military. It was political. The operation deepened Iranian hostility toward the United States for decades. Every action America took in the Gulf made the next confrontation more likely, more expensive, and more dangerous. Fifth, and this one people forget entirely, in 1990, Saddam Hussein seized Kuwait, a small, oil-rich territory in the Persian Gulf. And what happened? The entire world turned against him. The United Nations authorized force. A coalition of 35 nations drove Iraq out, and Saddam Hussein's regime never recovered. It took 13 years of sanctions, a second invasion, and the complete destruction of the Iraqi state. But it started with one decision: the decision to seize someone else's oil infrastructure by force. And that is exactly what seizing Kharg Island would be: the seizure of another country's primary oil asset. The parallels are not subtle. They are exact. So this is the pattern. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. 5 times in modern history, great powers have attempted to control strategic positions in the Persian Gulf. 5 times they succeeded temporarily, and 5 times the cost of maintaining that control contributed to their decline. Portugal fell. Britain withdrew. Iraq was destroyed twice. America's own 1988 operations achieved nothing lasting. And now Donald Trump wants to seize Kharg Island. The question every American should be asking is not whether the Marines can take it. Of course they can. The question is what happens next. Because history answers that question very clearly. Now I want to go deeper. I want to use strategic analysis and basic military mathematics to explain why seizing Kharg Island is not just historically unwise. It is structurally impossible to sustain, because this is not a matter of opinion. There are specific, measurable reasons why this operation would become a catastrophe. And the numbers do not lie. Reason 1. The logistics nightmare. Kharg Island is 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast. Let me say that again. 25 kilometers. That is within range of virtually every weapon system Iran possesses. Iranian anti-ship missiles can reach Kharg Island in under 2 minutes. Iranian artillery on the mainland can hit the island. Iranian drones, which Iran produces at a rate of approximately 500 per day according to Western intelligence estimates, can reach Kharg Island in minutes. Now consider what it takes to hold an island. You need a constant supply chain: fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, replacement equipment. All of this must come by sea or by air. And every supply ship, every transport helicopter, every cargo aircraft approaching Kharg Island would be within range of Iranian weapons for its entire approach. The United States would need to establish and maintain a supply corridor through some of the most heavily defended waters on Earth. During the Falklands War in 1982, Britain lost 6 ships trying to supply forces on islands 12,000 kilometers from Argentina. Kharg Island is 25 kilometers from Iran. The supply problem is not just difficult. It is, in practical terms, unsolvable at any reasonable cost. Reason 2. The cost asymmetry. And this is the number that should keep every Pentagon strategist awake at night. We know from this war that one Iranian drone costs approximately $50,000. We know that American defensive systems, Patriot missiles, SM-2 interceptors, cost between $2 million and $10 million per shot. We know that Iran has an estimated stockpile of 80,000 drones. Now, if America seizes Kharg Island, Iran does not need to retake it militarily. Iran simply needs to make holding it impossibly expensive. Send 50 drones per day at the island. That costs around $2.5 million per day. If America intercepts all 50, that costs America between $100 million and $500 million per day. Per day. Let me say that again. Iran spends $2.5 million. America spends up to $500 million. That is a cost ratio of 200 to 1. No empire in history has survived a 200 to 1 cost disadvantage in a sustained conflict. None. The mathematics of asymmetric warfare are absolute. They do not care about American military superiority. They do not care about aircraft carriers or stealth fighters. Mathematics is mathematics. And the math says America loses. Reason 3. The diplomatic catastrophe. Seizing Kharg Island would be, under international law, an act of territorial conquest. Not a military strike. Not a defensive operation. Conquest. The seizure of sovereign territory of a United Nations member state. Now, consider what this means diplomatically. China, which buys approximately 90% of Iran's remaining oil exports, would view this as a direct threat to its energy security. Russia would use it as justification for its own territorial ambitions. India, which depends on Gulf energy for 60% of its needs, would be forced to reconsider its relationship with the United States. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, which are already nervous about this war, would face enormous pressure from their own populations to distance themselves from America. And within NATO, Germany has already publicly criticized American operations in Iran. France has called for restraint. Even the United Kingdom, America's closest ally, has expressed reservations. Seizing Kharg Island would not just isolate America further. It would accelerate the very thing America is trying to prevent: the collapse of the dollar-based global financial system. Because the moment America seizes another country's oil infrastructure by force, every oil-producing nation on Earth asks the same question: are we next? Reason 4. The exit problem. And this is perhaps the most devastating strategic reality of all. Trump himself acknowledged it. He said America would need to be on Kharg Island for a while. But what does a while mean? Consider the precedents. America has been in Iraq for over 20 years. America was in Afghanistan for 20 years. America still has troops in South Korea after 73 years. Once you seize territory, leaving becomes almost impossible. Because the moment you leave, the enemy retakes it. And everything you spent, every dollar, every life, every year, was wasted. So the real question is not whether America can seize Kharg Island. Of course it can. The United States Marines are the most capable amphibious force in the world. The question is what happens on day 2, and day 30, and day 300, and year 5, because Iran will never stop trying to retake it. Iran has been fighting for its sovereignty for 3,000 years. They will fight for Kharg Island for as long as it takes. And America, based on every historical precedent, will eventually leave. Now I want to expand this analysis because the Kharg Island question is not just a military question. It is an economic question that affects every American directly. And here is what most people are completely missing. The International Energy Agency has called the closure of the Strait of Hormuz the biggest oil shock in history. Bigger than 1973. Bigger than 1979. Brent crude has risen more than 50% since the war began 5 weeks ago. Natural gas in Europe is up 59%. Fertilizer prices, the input that grows the food you eat every day, are up 34%. The World Food Program issued an emergency warning on March 19th calling this a rapidly unfolding humanitarian crisis. That warning was issued 11 days ago. The situation has only gotten worse since then. But here is what happens if America seizes Kharg Island. The war does not end. It escalates dramatically. Iran has explicitly stated, through its parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, that any attack on Iranian islands would be met with force across every front. Iran's military has warned that it would open a new front at the mouth of the Red Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which lies between Yemen and Djibouti, carries approximately 12% of all global trade. The Houthis in Yemen have already begun firing missiles at Israel as of March 28th. They have proven their capability and their willingness to act. Consider what happens if both Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb are closed simultaneously. That is 20% of global oil through Hormuz plus 12% of global trade through Suez. We are talking about the complete disruption of the global supply chain. Not a temporary disruption, a structural one. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset management company in the world with $10 trillion under management, has already warned that sustained disruption of Hormuz could push oil to $150 per barrel or higher. Goldman Sachs has modeled scenarios where oil reaches $200 per barrel and stays there for months. The IEA has described this as a supply disruption without precedent since the 1940s. At $200 oil, let me walk you through what happens to ordinary Americans. Gasoline hits $6 to $7 per gallon, possibly higher in California and the Northeast. Heating costs double for the 47 million American households that use natural gas or heating oil. Airline tickets increase 30 to 50%. Every product that is transported by truck, which is essentially every product you buy, increases in price. Food prices, which are directly tied to fuel and fertilizer costs, increase by 25 to 40%. A family of 4 that spends $1,000 per month on groceries is now spending $1,250 to $1,400 per month, while their retirement savings are simultaneously being destroyed. And here is the part that nobody in Washington wants to talk about. The American retirement system, 401k plans, pension funds, the entire structure of American middle-class wealth is invested in a stock market that cannot survive $200 oil. The S&P 500 has already declined significantly since the war began. A sustained oil crisis triggered by the seizure of Kharg Island could trigger the worst stock market crash since 2008, possibly worse than 2008, because in 2008, the crisis was financial. It could be solved with money. An oil crisis caused by war cannot be solved with money. It can only be solved by ending the war. And seizing Kharg Island does not end the war. It guarantees the war never ends. There is another dimension to this that I want you to understand because it reveals the fundamental strategic error at the heart of American policy. America is approaching this war as if it is a military problem with a military solution. Bomb enough targets, seize enough territory, and Iran surrenders. But Iran is not approaching this as a military problem. Iran is approaching this as an economic war, a political war, and a civilizational war simultaneously. Iran does not need to defeat America militarily. Iran needs to make the war so expensive, so politically divisive, and so economically destructive that America decides to leave. That is exactly what happened in Vietnam. That is exactly what happened in Afghanistan. And that is exactly what Iran has been preparing for 20 years. They studied American withdrawals. They analyzed American political vulnerabilities. They understood that American public support for a war collapses the moment it becomes expensive and the moment casualties mount. And they built their entire strategy around exploiting those exact weaknesses. Kharg Island is the bait. It looks like a prize. Control Kharg Island, control Iran's oil revenue, force Iran to negotiate. That is how it looks on a PowerPoint slide in the Pentagon. But in reality, seizing Kharg Island gives Iran exactly what it wants. A permanent American military presence within range of Iranian weapons, bleeding American resources at a ratio of 200-1, inflaming global opinion against the United States, and accelerating the collapse of the petrodollar system that sustains American financial power. So let me bring this all together, because I want to give you my assessment, not as prediction, but as structural analysis based on historical patterns and strategic mathematics. There is a concept in game theory called a commitment trap. It describes a situation where every step forward makes retreat more costly, even as the cost of staying increases. You are trapped by your own previous decisions. Vietnam was a commitment trap. Afghanistan was a commitment trap. And Kharg Island would be the most dangerous commitment trap in modern American history. Because once you seize it, you cannot give it back without admitting defeat. And you cannot hold it without spending hundreds of millions of dollars per day in a war of attrition against a country that has been fighting for its territory for 3,000 years. You are trapped. That is the definition of a strategic trap. And the most dangerous thing about a trap is that it looks like an opportunity right until the moment it closes around you. Kharg Island is that trap. It has always been that trap. Every power that has tried to control strategic positions in the Persian Gulf has eventually been forced to withdraw, weaker than when it arrived. Portugal lost its empire. Britain retreated from east of Suez. Iraq exhausted itself in an 8-year war and was ultimately destroyed. America's own 1988 operations achieved nothing lasting. The mathematics are clear. A 200-1 cost asymmetry is unsurvivable over any extended period. 25 kilometers from the Iranian coast is indefensible at sustainable cost. A permanent occupation of sovereign territory would shatter what remains of America's diplomatic relationships and accelerate the very de-dollarization that threatens American financial hegemony. And the economic consequences, $150 to $200 oil, potential stock market collapse, destruction of retirement savings, would fall not on the decision-makers in Washington, not on the generals, not on the defense contractors who will profit from every missile fired, but on ordinary Americans who had no voice in this decision and who will bear its cost for decades. Trump said, "Maybe we take Kharg Island." History says every empire that tried something similar in the Persian Gulf paid a price it could not afford. The question is not whether America has the military power to seize a small island 25 kilometers off the coast of Iran. Of course it does. The question is whether America can afford the consequences. And the answer, based on every piece of available evidence, historical, mathematical, economic, and strategic, is no. This is not fear. This is structural analysis. And the evidence points in one direction. Kharg Island is not the path to ending this war. It is the path to ensuring this war becomes the most expensive strategic mistake in American history.